I woke up at 6 for a quick breakfast, 6 in the evening that is. I hadn't gone far from the training grounds before I absolutely had to find someplace to sleep, and the warm metal tub atop a water tower had proven a surprisingly comfy fit. It was tempting to imagine the luxury of such forbidden naps I could enjoy were the world ending in just a slightly different way. Alas, I cycled on. I spent a decent chunk of the evening not sure where I was, as the woods gave out to more artificial desert, scrambling my map reading. Close to midnight though, I found the woods again, then a small town which restored my bearings. The town was at the foot of a gradually rising set of hills. My promised land was up there. I topped up with another 6 hours of sleep in a crumbling family home, took breakfast on their porch, enjoying the sun, then slogged on. A few hours later I had ascended the miles of hills and reached a strange spot. The hill's summit was covered in snow, again of the kind with a fake consistency but genuine chill. Who could doubt this was my destination? The defensive snow was arranged in a rough circle around a warmer spot, which was where the army had built an encampment. It had a metal watchtower, and the grounds around it were cleared of trees. The resultant firewood was waiting for me inside. More interestingly, it was surrounded by a minefield. This was obvious, as the metal plates were not buried. It was designed to fool less observant creatures than me. A few paths through it had been dug out of the long grass. Behind them was a wall of low-effort sandbags, either unfinished or unambitious in its height. I rolled over to it to enter the trench behind. This trench ringed the camp, and was about half as deep and wide as it needed to be. So far, I wasn't impressed. Things were a little better inside. Lots of forest camo tents covered banks of machines and computers, and some were actually on. There were solar panels on the roofs, and thick wires running everywhere through the mud. I heard movement and expected to be greeted, but it was just a few zombie soldiers. There was a military transport truck parked in the center, its back end full of empty plastic pallets. From its ramp there were drag marks in the ground that led into one of the tents. I followed them in. A buzzing sound caught my attention, as did a grubby hole in the ground with the tip of a ladder poking out. The buzz was coming from a metal table in the corner, which had a big video camera on it. It had loads of stuff grafted onto the sides, including a fluffy microphone and industrial cables that slipped through a rip in the canvas behind it. I peeked out. There was a short antenna there, faintly buzzing too. I began to feel nervous. I approached the camera thing and tapped the foam on the microphone. The buzzing was louder here. I crouched down and looked into the lens. Couldn't see anything. Well, what do you know, that's not how cameras work, is it? I was like a caveman, paralyzed by nerves, or excitement perhaps. I took a drink of water, cleared my throat, and greeted the camera speculatively. I tapped the case a few times and repeated my greeting, increasingly jaded. There was a load of clicking sounds, then a voice said hello to me. It had been a while since that happened. I pretty much shouted it back. "This is the Vector?" the voice asked. It was rough, like a weak radio signal. "Yeah," I said, not really knowing if it was true. The voice was very happy about this and told me to stay where I was while they informed others. Quiet again. I wasn't sure if I should say anything or if they could still hear me. I looked at the hole in the ground. There was a light deep down there. I called down, but the reply came from the camera. "My friend," a southern accent said. I waved hello. "We had no idea you were doing so well. This is something really special. Really special. We were worried, I'll admit. So thank you, thank you." "Yeah," was all I said back. Well, what was I meant to say to that? "Oh, you don't." She started laughing, and others seemed to join her in the background. "I, my friend, am the President of the United States." She paused for my reaction. I looked away from the camera, then back at it. I wasn't sure if I was meant to be laughing. "You haven't followed the news, have you?" she said patronizingly. She then started listing measures she had introduced as president in recent months. I didn't really know what she was talking about. She kept saying Eastcom, which I was probably supposed to know about already. At the end of each point, her voice went quiet, followed by some background voices rising up. I think whoever was in her live audience was enjoying the show. I decided to interrupt the farce, as it was mid-afternoon on the mist night in the middle of the woods, and this camp was going to last about 5 minutes when the horde came. I said as much to the camera. The president laughed. Another voice chimed in, an old man I'd say, telling me to take the camera down the ladder. The coiled up wire didn't look long enough, and indeed it wasn't. I climbed halfway down the ladder, genuinely expecting to meet someone in person. I called out again and again, but no real voices came back, only the camera people insisting they were still listening and asking if I was at the bottom. I left them hanging about 3/4 of the way down. The narrow shaft opened up into a larger tunnel, big enough to walk through. It was lit with orange lights, revealing metal walls filled with vents, floor to ceiling. "We're stuck, bring us with you," the president insisted. I climbed back up the ladder and told them the wire was too short. The president laughed and directed someone to come to the microphone. "Hello, Vector. It's Colonel McNamara," a gruff voice said. "Ah." I asked immediately if this was a joke, and McNamara said it was just the best that could be done. I asked if I should hide in this hole, and he told me all about it, completely accurately, as it turned out. The tunnel at the foot of the ladder ran for about 10 meters to a blockade room, where progress was blocked by a wall of steel bars, like a prison cell. A set of 3 heavy doors to the side let me get around behind them, sealing the way as I went. The other side had large crates, power tools, a big workbench, and most strikingly, a large machine gun that could be lowered from the ceiling on a springy arm. Its ammunition feed ran from the drum on the side into a massive reserve concreted into the ceiling. It was pointing through the bars back down the tunnel. There you have it then, a shooting gallery for mindless defense. I was a little impressed, definitely an improvement on the scrap house roof. I had 2,000 visible MG cartridges, along with stocks of other ammunition, living supplies, and construction material left over from the build. This wasn't all. A short passage ran off from the barricade room, stepping down into what was called my cell. It was a modest prison of metal and rock, with a yellow light drilled into the stone above the frame and mattress affectionately referred to as a bed. The metal parts of the wall were covered with those air vents all over, completely overkill. It wasn't just for air, as the colonel explained. Clinging to the ladder, occasionally looking into the lens, I heard that I needed as much red mist as I could get. That was the key to my powers. Big surprise. I asked what I was supposed to do, and he said I had to live as long as possible. At this point, a new voice took over. "They're really serious about all this," it said. "They're going to explain everything to you, now, aren't they?" "That's Hassan, our driver," the colonel said grumpily. "BB Hassan," I spat. "Glad to talk at last," she said, with a friendly tone. I wasn't feeling that friendly, and started to bombard her with questions about my poor treatment. The president took the microphone and spoke over me until I started listening. "It's ultimately the purpose of our mission on Earth to overcome this," she was saying. Sounded like the aliens had landed. "You're going to grow into the great womb from which our nation shall be restored, unopposed." The studio audience sounded happy about that. I didn't feel like a womb, but what did I know? "We're putting everything behind you. I've moved my whole staff here, and they're all working day and night to get the secrets we can from the samples." "What samples?" I asked, but she continued. "And all you have to do is keep growing and keep up your excellent work as the Vector. When the program began, we had no idea it would be so vital and effective. We're not going to stop now, are we?" "Hey, President, let me out," I said, gripping the camera. I was looking for this whole charade to end in information regarding my rescue and exit. She just said the wrong thing. "You know we can't do that. You're our hero," she said, trying to be soft. "I don't know anything. What do you want from me?" I shouted. There was background chatter. I heard Hassan accusing the colonel of wrongdoing, and the colonel angrily citing knowledge above and beyond your pay grade that proved otherwise. After a while I said, "Can someone just tell me what's left out there? Who are you all? Am I ever going to get out? Just tell me fast." Saying that wore my withered voice out. I sipped water and listened to the clattering sounds of the mouthpiece being moved about. "It's working," Hassan's voice said to me, more clearly than before. "It's not going to last forever. The infection spreads in the water, and we've got... The EastCom is the main block left over, and we're going to work with them to make a cure. Your reaction to the disease is special. It's something with your brain, I think. We need to replicate it. That will make a big... Please, Colonel." She was cut off by a scuffling, after which the Colonel came on. "Don't do anything stupid. It's all or nothing. This is the endgame, citizen," he announced. I heard echoing footsteps, like heavy boots in a hallway. "You're not going to be alone forever, I'll promise you that. When we have some more vectors ready, ones like you, we can bring this whole country back under control. Just breathe the mist as much as you can. The cell's going to make it easy, alright?" "How long will it take?" I asked. No response. I noticed the buzzing had stopped too. I climbed up and poked around. I think the batteries powering the camp were empty. Flashing lights on a box beside the solar panels seemed to indicate that they would fill up eventually. Eventually, that was the word of the day. I wished I was still talking to those guys. I had a feeling, growing over the previous weeks, that what was happening to me was an inalterable part of their plans, and now I was certain of it. Keep all the attention on me. Poor little me. And they hadn't even asked for my name. Vector wasn't such a bad name, I guess. I had some dinner. About 9 I went back and played with the switches on the camera, but I couldn't get the buzzing to return. I guess something had to happen on their end at the same time to really make it work. Battery was 2% full and had stopped charging for the night. Well, it wasn't like I needed showing to my room. I sat behind the machine gun as night fell, inspecting it all over and hoping I knew how to work it. It was easy enough. A few zombies tumbled down the open ladder shaft, far fewer than I expected. The problem was that they were plugging the shaft near the top and just ripping up the dirt trying to dig down to me. Over time they got further and further down, and more made it into the killing tunnel. The machine gun did its work remarkably, kicking my shoulder into oblivion. I kept to single shots or short bursts, with the odd indulgence of a prolonged burst that sent bullets ricocheting down the metal tunnel. Around me, those vents seeped the red mist into the room. That was the real genius of this place. Tasty, nutritious mist. I didn't feel any different with it there, but I was fully willing to believe that I needed it. I was a zombie, same as the rest of them, after all. Zombie with a machine gun bunker. The unlikely hero here to save the world. Just needed to bring all the monsters down into my kill zone, and the president would be very impressed with my work, right? What was that about a sample? Something told me the cure they were working on wasn't going to help those already beyond death. My poor workmates. Question was, would it help me? Indeed, there was now only one way to find out. We did have a problem when morning came around. The zombies in my tunnel weren't going to be able to climb back out. The ladder shaft had been radically expanded by the furious digging all night, creating a ramp from the surface that got about 2/3 of the way down. This inspired me to make a little improvement, adding to the quality of life for my many victims. First I took a nap on the cold bed, noting that the red mist had made it the faintest bit damp, which also brought me to realize that my cell had nothing in the way of hygiene facilities. There was a tap up in the camp that actually ran water, so something could be arranged there. Not important. The real work was digging out the ramp so that instead of a shaft and ladder, my tunnel was accessed via a slope from the camp's outer trench. I dug out mud and more impressively chipped away at the rocks with a pick. This would normally have been a waste of a puny human's calories, yet I was no mere human. My super strength let me crack the rock with huge swings, which was really fun. That said, I was done with it after the few hours it took to smooth the route down. I dragged the zombie bodies out, because they were quite clever when it came to their reanimation, not wanting to do it around me. Clearly they were well aware of their surrounds as they slowly regrew and played dead, only escaping to safer spots when the time was right. I laughed out loud after heading back to my cell. With my ear to the vents, I could hear the corpses in the tunnel getting up and shambling up the freshly hewn exit ramp. That's my good deed for the day done. And as I've mentioned, I do like to keep a tidy house. I went back to the camera. Still nothing. I wiped my hands over various other control panels and machines, feeling for buttons that resisted pushing or had some warmth to them. There were a few, although fiddling with them didn't change anything. The solar panels read 10%, which seemed like enough for a broadcast to me. It looked like the other end had full control of it. Wouldn't want their vector getting in touch with anyone else, right? Sunset approached. I was enjoying the peace of the camp, being that it was deep in the woods, with a refreshing chill in the wind coming over the snowbanks outside. Then something rather special happened. The sky darkened, grey clouds rolled in, and by 9 it was sleeting. This developed into soft snow. It wasn't cold enough for it, absolutely certain of that. Seems they had a delivery mechanism. So yeah, it snowed, and while it wasn't real, it was extremely beautiful. I sat on the roof of the watchtower and witnessed the trees catching the snow in their branches. It was surreal to think that this weather was for me. I enjoyed feeling cold and catching the shadows of birds moving about. Could even have been bats. Surprised bats didn't mutate into something crazy. Had to be bears instead, huh? Not really sure how they did all that. Must have made me safer, although I suspected it wouldn't do much. I was right, and the army knew it too. It wasn't supposed to keep the zombies out, and if they had something which worked for that, they definitely wouldn't have used it. I got this vibe pretty heavy the next afternoon. Came out of the cell after a serious sleep, refurbished the latrine up top to accommodate my presence, and then went back to the camera. This time it switched on and immediately gave off the buzz. I tapped the microphone and said hello. Someone said they would get the colonel. This took a few minutes, frustrating given I had no idea how long the machine was going to last. When he showed, he sounded like he'd been roused from sleeping, drinking, or both. This was at 5 in the afternoon, and I was pretty confident we were in the same time zone. I actually asked where he was, and he talked about a military airbase that was rapidly becoming the center of the nation. Yes, that president was still there, and more people were showing up on their doorstep because of it. I wanted to get clues about its exact location relative to me, but this colonel nipped this in the bud, claiming that I couldn't be trusted to know. That was really good news, actually. Why? Because it meant their system for keeping me in the zone had a flaw. In other words, they weren't so confident they could keep me inside, otherwise info like their location wouldn't matter one way or the other. Still, a shame he didn't trust me. If he had, it might have tempted me to not be seeking an out. Yes, I still wanted out, even though I was increasingly convinced that I really was saving the world. Just a personal thing, really. I wasn't that interested in saving the world, given that the world I would have liked to save seemed not to exist. This dream, this series of buzzy voices from an unknown dimension, was much less convincing than they thought they were. The colonel asked if the cell was working, and I asked back when I'd be able to leave. "This does have an end," he said, dripping with darkness, I thought. I told him the cell was fine, and I'd improved it. He was surprised, so I talked about my ramp. Now I knew they weren't watching that closely. I clarified that I wasn't asking about leaving the cell, but the zone as a whole. "Once a replacement strategy is in place," the colonel said. "For this science to work, we need you to remain under threat to stimulate your body's chemistry." He stopped just short of mentioning my precious bodily fluids. "That's why we can't put you in a chopper, or a mine, or speeding down the highway, or anything else you're about to ask, okay? That cell, the safety cell, is carefully crafted. It's exactly as safe as it needs to be. No more, no less." "Who decides that?" I asked. Ordinarily, we wouldn't communicate with you in order to avoid these misgivings, but since you are already so developed, immortal, we can take a chance," the Colonel said, with surprising indifference. "One day, we'll all be like you. That's when this will be over." "How?" I asked, a question intended to cover the 100 lines of inquiry this dry-throated rambling opened up. "It is not a mutation, or even evolution, simply the completion, full growth, the realization of potential. What we see in the world now are symptoms of this growth being denied. You are the final stage of this disease. Thank you, citizen. We have little time. Your understanding is appreciated." I told him via long-winded terms that understanding wasn't the word I would use. He said that he was going to fetch the president to speak to me again, although mercifully the battery ran out before any more voices reached me. That was that. I felt a little emboldened by that chat, and by my powers. Some mad science was happening for sure, but as for me, I might just be the freest person in the entire world. Sort of. Of course, to get anywhere with that, I'd need something a little faster than a bicycle. The camp had that big truck, and spare parts for vehicles that had once called the place home. I recognized a few. I could make good use of my little sabbatical in the woods, I thought. I returned to my cell and schemed plans in my head, shuddering against the recoil of the machine gun for 6 noisy hours. Ear protectors were provided, kindly. I breathed in the mist, felt the danger in my pumping blood when the monsters charged, doing just what the world supposedly needed of me. I thought of Hassan, of that president, and of this strange colonel. I couldn't decide if I owed them something, or vice versa. It wouldn't matter if I could find a way to never see them again. The only thing was, what if they were right?